Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October. Marla Devlin jerked awake from the couch where she'd fallen asleep waiting for Cole to come home from his late shift at the machine shop. The television still glowed with some late-night talk show, but the sound had faded to a whisper. Mrs. Devlin. The voice was professional, careful. This is Officer Martinez with Portland Police. There's been an accident. The words hit her like ice water. Marla sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs. What kind of accident? Ma'am, I need you to come to Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. Your husband and children were involved in a collision. Are they hurt? How bad? Marla was already reaching for her keys, her nursing training kicking in. She knew the protocols, knew the careful language they used. But this was different. This was her family. Ma'am, it would be better if you came in person. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of red lights and empty streets. Marla's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She kept thinking about Cole's last text. Picking up the kids from Mom's. Home by 11. Her mother-in-law had watched Avery and Finn while Marla worked a double shift in the ER to the hospital. Officer Martinez met her at the entrance. He was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes that couldn't quite meet hers. Mrs. Devlin, I'm very sorry. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Sandy Boulevard and 82nd Avenue. The impact was immediate. They didn't suffer. The words came at her like punches. Didn't suffer. Impact was immediate. She understood what he meant, but her mind refused to process it. Where are they? She asked. Ma'am, where are my husband and children? Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 12 years dealing with medical emergencies. I'm a trauma nurse. I want to see them. Cole looked peaceful. That was the only comfort Marla could find as she stood beside the gurney in the morgue. His face was unmarked, his dark hair still messy the way it always was after work. If she didn't look at the rest of him, she could pretend he was sleeping. Avery and Finn were in the next room. Her 8-year-old daughter with her serious brown eyes and Cole's stubborn chin. Her 5-year-old son who still asked her to check for monsters under his bed. Both of them gone in an instant because some drunk couldn't wait for a taxi. 3:17 a.m. After she'd signed papers and answered questions and made the hardest phone calls of her life, Marla sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and dialed her parents. Her mother answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. Marla? What's wrong? Mom, there's been an accident. The words felt foreign in her mouth. Cole and the kids are gone. Silence stretched across the line. Then her father's voice, sharp and alert. He'd taken the phone from her mother. Gone how? Car accident. A drunk driver hit them. They died instantly. Another pause. She could hear her parents whispering to each other, but couldn't make out the words. That's terrible, honey, her father said finally. His voice was calm, detached, like he was discussing the weather. But today's your sister's birthday. We can't come. She's 30. She needs her family there. Marla stared at the phone, certain she'd misheard. Dad, did you understand what I just told you? Cole is dead. Avery and Finn are dead. I heard you, but we've had this party planned for months. Brielle's counting on us. I need you here. The words came out as a whisper. We'll call you after the party. Maybe we can drive up next week. The line went dead. Marla sat in the parking lot until dawn, watching the sun rise over a world that no longer made sense. Her family was gone, and her parents had chosen birthday cake over graves. The funeral was held on a Friday morning at Sunset Memorial Gardens. Marla had chosen the small chapel because Cole hated crowds, and Avery had always been afraid of large spaces. The caskets were arranged at the front, surrounded by flowers that smelled too sweet and seemed too bright for such a dark day. Jenna Lark arrived early, wearing the only black dress she owned and carrying a thermos of coffee that Marla knew would be laced with whiskey. Jenna had been her neighbor for 6 years, ever since she'd moved into the house next door after leaving the army. She was 41, broad-shouldered, and had hands that could fix anything mechanical. She was also the only person who'd shown up to help Marla plan the funeral. "How you holding up?" Jenna asked, settling into the pew beside Marla. "I keep thinking they'll walk through that door," Marla said. Cole complaining about having to wear a tie. Finn asking why everyone looks so sad. "That's normal. Grief does strange things to your head." Noah Farley slipped into the pew behind them. He was a paramedic at the hospital, someone Marla had worked with dozens of times during trauma calls. He was 34, quiet, and had the kind of steady presence that made people feel safe during emergencies. "Marla, I'm so sorry," he said, leaning forward to squeeze her shoulder. "If you need anything, thank you for coming." As the service began, Marla kept glancing toward the back of the chapel. Her parents' flight from Minnesota was supposed to have landed the night before. She'd left 3 voicemails with the funeral details. But the chapel remained empty except for Jenna, Noah, and a handful of Cole's coworkers. The pastor spoke about love and loss and God's plan. Marla heard none of it. She was thinking about the phone call, about her father's voice when he said Brielle needed her family there, about how Cole had never been good enough for them because he worked with his hands instead of sitting behind a desk, about how they'd never once offered to help when money was tight or when Marla was working double shifts to pay off nursing school loans. After the service, as they stood beside the graves watching the caskets disappear into the earth, Noah cleared his throat. "Where's your family?" he asked. "They had other plans." Jenna turned to stare at her. "Other plans? Your husband and kids just died." "My sister's birthday party was more important." The two of them exchanged a look that Marla pretended not to see. She knew what they were thinking. What kind of people chose a birthday party over their daughter's family funeral? That evening, Marla sat alone in her house for the first time in 12 years. The silence was complete. No Cole humming while he fixed dinner. No Avery practicing piano. No Finn building elaborate structures with his blocks. Just emptiness and the sound of her own breathing. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table where she'd paid bills and helped with homework and planned family vacations they'd never take. The house felt like a museum now, filled with artifacts of a life that no longer existed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Sorry we missed the service. Hope it went well. Love you. Hope it went well." Like it was a school play or a work presentation. Marla deleted the message without responding. Then she opened a notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, "They will never be able to live this down. They will regret it for the rest of their lives." She underlined the words twice. The memories came in waves over the following weeks. Marla found herself thinking about incidents she'd pushed aside for years, moments when her parents' favoritism had been so obvious she'd learned to expect it. When Brielle was 19, she dropped out of college halfway through her sophomore year because she wanted to find herself traveling through Europe. Their parents had paid her tuition again when she decided to re-enroll 2 years later. When she dropped out the second time to pursue a career in fashion, they bought her a boutique storefront downtown and helped her stock it with inventory. Meanwhile, Marla had worked 2 jobs to pay for nursing school while raising a newborn and a toddler. When she'd asked for help with childcare so she could study for finals, her mother had said they were too busy helping Brielle get established. The pattern was always the same. Brielle's needs came first, always. Her dreams were important. Her happiness mattered. Marla was the responsible one, the one who could handle anything, the one who didn't need help. 3 days after the funeral, Marla's phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey. How are you doing?" "I buried my family 3 days ago. How do you think I'm doing?" There's no need to be snippy. We wanted to check on you. Really? Because you didn't want to check on me badly enough to come to the funeral. Her mother sighed. Marla, we've talked about this. Brielle needed us. It was a milestone birthday. My children were 5 and 8 years old. They'll never have another birthday. You're being dramatic. We'll visit next month when things settle down. Don't bother. What's that supposed to mean? Marla stared out her kitchen window at Jenna's house next door. Her neighbor was in the driveway, working on her motorcycle with a cigarette dangling from her lips. She'd been there every day since the funeral, bringing food and checking on Marla without making a big deal about it. It means I'm done pretending you care about anyone but Brielle. That's not fair. We love you both equally. No, you don't. You never have. And now I'm done pretending it doesn't matter. Marla hung up and turned off her phone. That night, she called in sick to work and spent hours going through financial records. Cole had been good with money, careful and methodical. The life insurance policy would be enough to pay off the house and live on for a while if she was careful. But it was the research she did afterward that proved most interesting. Brielle's boutique had a website with a blog section where she posted about her entrepreneurial journey. The recent posts told a story of struggle. Foot traffic was down. Online sales were disappointing. She'd had to let go of her only employee. Marla dug deeper, using her knowledge of business records and public filings. The boutique was 3 months behind on rent. Her parents had co-signed the lease and were listed as emergency contacts for the business accounts. More interesting was what she found about her father's finances. Gerald Reichert had retired early from his job as a bank manager, supposedly because of smart investments. But the property records told a different story. He'd been selling off rental properties and stocks to fund Brielle's lifestyle. There was something else, too. A detail she remembered from childhood conversations. Her father's sister Margot had never married, never had children. She'd made a fortune in real estate in Florida and had always been close to Gerald when they were young. Family legend said she planned to leave everything to him when she died. Marla closed her laptop and poured another glass of wine. For the first time since the accident, she felt something other than grief. It was cold and sharp and focused. It was the beginning of a plan. 6 months passed before Marla felt ready to act. The initial crushing weight of grief had settled into something harder and more manageable. She'd returned to work at the hospital, throwing herself into 12-hour shifts that left her too exhausted to think about empty bedrooms and silent dinners. But the anger remained, burning steady and bright. She started with simple research. Public records, social media, business filings. The internet made it easy to track someone's life if you knew where to look. And Marla had always been good at finding information. Brielle's Instagram told the story of someone desperately trying to maintain appearances. Designer clothes and expensive dinners, but always at the same few places. The boutique's inventory had dwindled to clearance items and poorly made knockoffs. The last few posts begged followers to support local business and share with friends. The commercial property records showed that Brielle's rent was now 5 months behind. The landlord had filed eviction papers twice, only to withdraw them after payments were made at the last minute. Gerald and Luann were clearly funding the rescue efforts. But it was the discovery about Margot that changed everything. Marla found her aunt's address through property records in Tampa. A search of local newspapers revealed that Margot Reichert, age 73, was a prominent philanthropist who donated millions to hospitals and children's charities over the years. She lived quietly in an upscale retirement community and, according to a recent interview, was concerned about leaving a meaningful legacy. The article mentioned that Margot worked with a financial advisor named Graham Teller, whose office was located downtown. It also noted that she had no children and that her closest living relatives were a brother in Minnesota and his family. Marla spent the next 2 weeks learning everything she could about Graham Teller. He was 61, married, with a practice that catered to wealthy retirees. His wife, Patricia, had suffered a stroke 3 years earlier and required ongoing medical care. The opportunity presented itself on a Thursday evening in April. Marla was working the night shift when the ambulance brought in a woman having cardiac symptoms. The patient was Patricia Teller, and her husband was in the back of the ambulance, white-faced and terrified. "My wife," Graham said as they wheeled Patricia into the trauma bay. "She had a stroke a few years ago. She's been doing well, but tonight she started having chest pains." Marla took charge of the situation with the calm efficiency that had made her one of the hospital's most trusted nurses. She stayed with Graham while the doctors worked, explaining procedures and offering updates. When Patricia was stabilized and moved to a cardiac unit, Marla helped Graham with the paperwork and insurance forms. "Thank you," he said, shaking her hand. "You've been incredibly kind. I don't know what I would have done without your help." "It's what we're here for," Marla said. "I'm glad she's going to be okay." 2 days later, Graham appeared at the nurse's station with a bouquet of flowers and a handwritten thank you note. He stayed to chat for a few minutes, and Marla mentioned that she was a widow, that she'd lost her husband and children in a car accident. "I'm so sorry," Graham said. "That must be devastating." "It's been difficult, but I'm trying to focus on positive things. I'm actually working on setting up a charitable foundation in their memory." It wasn't entirely a lie. Marla had been thinking about it, researching the legal requirements for nonprofit organizations. She told Graham about her plans to help families dealing with sudden loss, to provide support that she'd never received. "That's wonderful," Graham said. "Meaningful work like that can help with healing. I have a client who's very passionate about charitable giving. She's always looking for worthy causes to support." "Really? What kind of causes?" "Medical charities, mostly. Children's hospitals, trauma centers. She believes in helping people during their most vulnerable moments." Graham's client, he explained, was an elderly woman who'd built her wealth through smart investments and real estate. She was getting older and thinking more about her legacy, about how to make sure her money did good in the world. "She's very careful about the organizations she supports," Graham said. "She wants to make sure they're run by people with genuine intentions, not just looking for a quick payout." Marla nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. There are so many scams out there." Over the following weeks, Graham stopped by the hospital several times to check on Patricia, who was recovering well. Each time, he and Marla talked a little longer. She shared more details about her foundation plans, about her background in trauma nursing, about how the accident had changed her perspective on life. "You know," Graham said during one visit, "I think Margot would be very interested in meeting you. She values authenticity in your story, what you've been through, and what you're trying to build from it. I think it would resonate with her." "I'd be honored to meet her," Marla said, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Not at all. Let me talk to her about it." The meeting with Margot Reichert took place on a warm Sunday afternoon in May. Marla drove to the retirement community in Tampa, a sprawling complex of elegant condominiums surrounded by golf courses and gardens. She'd taken vacation time for the trip, telling herself it was just a fact-finding mission. Margot lived in a corner unit with windows overlooking a lake. She was smaller than Marla had expected, barely 5 feet tall with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. The apartment was furnished with antiques and family photos, including several of Gerald from their childhood. "Graham tells me you're starting a foundation," Margot said, gesturing for Marla to sit on a cream-colored sofa. "Tell me about it." Marla had prepared for this conversation carefully. She spoke about her experience as a trauma nurse, about the families she'd seen devastated by sudden loss. She described her plans for the Devlin Family Memorial Foundation, which would provide emergency financial assistance and grief counseling for families dealing with unexpected deaths. "The gaps in the system are enormous," Marla said. "When someone dies suddenly, families are dealing with funeral costs, lost income, medical bills, all while they're trying to process their grief. There's very little support available." Margot listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about funding models and operational plans. She seemed particularly interested in Marla's background and training. "You've clearly thought this through," Margot said. "Too many people think they can just throw money at a problem and call it charity. Real philanthropy requires strategy and commitment." They talked for 2 hours. Margot served tea and shared stories about her own charitable work, her frustrations with organizations that wasted donations on administrative costs and flashy fundraising events. "I've always believed that the best charities are run by people who understand the problem personally," Margot said. "People who aren't in it for recognition or profit." As Marla prepared to leave, Margot walked her to the door. "I hope you'll keep me updated on your progress," she said. "This foundation sounds like exactly the kind of work I want to support." On the drive back to Portland, Marla allowed herself to feel satisfied. The meeting had gone better than expected. More importantly, she'd learned something crucial about her aunt's perspective on family. When Margot had shown her the family photos, she'd pointed to one of Gerald from his wedding day. "My brother was such a promising young man," she'd said with a sigh. "I'd hoped he would do more with his life, make better choices about what really matters." The comment had been casual, almost throwaway, but Marla had caught the disappointment in her aunt's voice. Back in Portland, Marla began the legal process of incorporating the Devlin Family Memorial Foundation. She hired a lawyer, filed the necessary paperwork, and opened a bank account. She even made a small donation from her own savings to establish the organization's legitimacy. She also started keeping detailed records of her parents' financial situation. Property sales, bank transfers, any public information she could find about their attempts to keep Brielle's business afloat. The most interesting discovery came from a conversation with a former coworker of her father's. Gerald had taken early retirement, the man explained, not because of successful investments, but because of mounting financial pressure. "He was always bailing out that younger daughter of his," the coworker said. "Spent his retirement savings keeping her business going. Word is they're banking on an inheritance from his sister down in Florida." Marla filed this information away. Everything was beginning to make sense. Her parents' future financial security depended on Margot's will, which meant they had everything to lose if Margot decided they weren't worthy of her legacy. The opportunity to strike came in July. Marla had been tracking the ownership of Brielle's boutique building for months, waiting for the right moment. When the property finally went up for sale, she was ready, using a portion of Cole's life insurance money. She set up an LLC managed by Jenna. The paperwork listed Jenna as the primary contact and decision-maker, with no mention of Marla's involvement. To anyone checking the records, it would look like a local mechanic had decided to invest in commercial real estate. The purchase was handled through lawyers and shell companies, layers of legal protection that kept Marla's name out of public records. She paid cash, outbidding 2 other potential buyers by a significant margin. The sale closed on a Wednesday. By Friday, Brielle received notice that her building had been sold and that her lease would not be renewed when it expired at the end of the month. Marla learned about the eviction from Brielle's social media posts, which shifted from desperation to fury within hours. Greedy developers are destroying local businesses. Brielle wrote on Instagram, "Some corporate landlord bought our building and is kicking us out with no warning. This is what's wrong with America." The post went viral locally, generating sympathy and outrage. Several customers offered to help with moving costs or finding a new location. But underneath the supportive comments, other voices began to emerge. "Didn't you just buy that expensive purse last week?" one person wrote. "Maybe pay your rent on time next time," said another. Marla watched the online drama unfold with cold satisfaction. She'd been feeding information to a local blogger named Kevin Torres for weeks, providing him with public records and anonymous tips about businesses that received family funding. Torres had built his following by exposing what he called nepotism capitalism, and he'd been eager to investigate Brielle's boutique. The blog post went live the same day Brielle received her eviction notice. It was titled "Birthday Money: how local business owner relies on family bailouts, and included detailed financial information about the boutique's debts and the Reichert's repeated rescue efforts. While many small business owners struggle to make ends meet through hard work and careful planning, Torres wrote, some rely on the bank of mom and dad to keep their dreams alive. Sources confirm that Reichert Boutique has been behind on rent for months, with family members repeatedly covering shortfalls. The article included photos from Brielle's social media showing expensive purchases and vacations, contrasted with her public pleas for customers to support local business. The comments section filled with angry responses from people who donated money or bought overpriced items to help what they thought was a struggling entrepreneur. That Brielle's response was swift and disastrous. She posted a video on Instagram defending her right to family support and attacking the blogger as jealous of successful women. She claimed that all businesses received help from investors and that her situation was no different. At least my family believes in me, she said in the video, tears streaming down her face. At least they support my dreams instead of tearing me down. The video was shared hundreds of times, but not in the way Brielle had hoped. Comments ranged from mockery to genuine anger, with many people pointing out the difference between professional investors and parents who enabled adult children's poor decisions. Within a week, the boutique's remaining inventory was marked down to clearance prices. Brielle spent her final days in the space desperately trying to sell enough merchandise to pay moving costs. Marla drove by the building once during those final days. She saw Brielle through the window, surrounded by half-empty racks and boxes. Looking exhausted and defeated, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no regret. Just the cold certainty that this was only the beginning. That evening, she called Graham Teller. I wanted to update you on the foundation's progress, she said. We've completed the legal incorporation and we're beginning to identify our first recipients. That's wonderful news, Graham said. Margot will be pleased to hear it. She's been asking about you. I'm planning another trip to Florida next month. I'd love to show her some of our preliminary work. I'll set something up. She's been talking about revising her will recently, making sure her charitable bequests are directed to the right organizations. After hanging up, Marla poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her back porch. The evening air was warm and still, and she could hear Jenna working in her garage next door. 6 months ago. She'd been a grieving widow with no plan beyond getting through each day. Now, she was the head of a legitimate charitable foundation with growing connections to her aunt's financial advisor. Her sister's business was destroyed, her parents' finances were strained, and their future inheritance was increasingly uncertain. But she wasn't finished. Not even close that on September 15th, Brielle Reichert turned 31. Marla knew this because the invitation had been posted on social media 6 weeks in advance, complete with details about the venue, the theme, and requests for donations to help rebuild my business dreams. The party was being held at the same country club where the family had celebrated Brielle's 30th birthday the day Marla buried her husband and children. Marla had spent months preparing for this moment. She documented everything. Screenshots of her parents' social media posts from the previous year's party, timestamp photos showing them celebrating while she sat alone at grave sites, records of every phone call and text message that proved they'd chosen to prioritize Brielle's birthday over their daughter's family funeral, that she'd also been building relationships with local journalists, particularly investigative reporter David Kim, who worked for the Portland Tribune. Kim had written several exposés about family dysfunction and social media culture, and he'd expressed interest in stories about how grief and loss revealed people's true priorities 3 days before the party. Marla assembled her evidence into a comprehensive package. Photos, phone records, social media screenshots, funeral records, everything organized chronologically to tell the complete story. She included a written statement explaining her decision to go public. This isn't about revenge, she wrote. It's about accountability. When people make choices that reveal their fundamental values, those choices should have consequences. My parents chose birthday cake over graves. The community that supported them should know what kind of people they really are. She sent the package to Kim anonymously, using an encrypted email service and a disposable phone number. She also sent copies to 3 other journalists and 2 popular local social media influencers who specialized in viral content. The story broke on September 13th, 2 days before Brielle's party. Kim's article ran with the headline, "Family Skipped Funeral for Birthday Party," when priorities reveal character, and included everything Marla had provided. The piece went viral within hours. It was shared thousands of times on Facebook and Twitter, with comments ranging from outrage to disbelief. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national blogs, then morning talk shows. "Can you imagine choosing a birthday party over your own grandchildren's funeral?" asked one TV host. "What kind of people do that?" The internet's response was swift and merciless. Gerald and Luann Reichert's personal information was posted online within hours. Their home address, phone number, email accounts, everything available through public records. Their social media profiles were flooded with angry messages. Brielle's Instagram account, which had been struggling since the boutique closure, became a target for coordinated harassment. Thousands of people commented on old photos, calling her selfish and spoiled. Her planned birthday party became a symbol of tone-deaf privilege. "Birthday girl" or "spoiled brat" read one viral meme that paired Brielle's party photos with images from Cole and the children's funeral on the day of the party. Protesters gathered outside the country club. They carried signs reading "Justice for Marla" and "Shame on the Reicherts." Local news crews filmed the demonstration, which only amplified the story's reach. Marla watched the coverage from her living room, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. She'd given the world the truth, and the world had responded exactly as she'd expected. The party went ahead despite the protests, but photos posted by attendees showed a sparse gathering with nervous-looking guests. Brielle's usual confident social media presence disappeared entirely. She posted no photos, no updates, no defiant statements. That evening, Marla's phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. "How could you do this to us?" Luann's voice was shaking with rage. "How could you destroy your own family?" "I didn't destroy anything," Marla said calmly. "I just told people what you did. You made us look like monsters." "I told the truth. If that makes you look like monsters, maybe you should think about why. We tried to call you. We wanted to come, but the party was already planned." "Stop." Marla's voice cut through her mother's excuses. "Don't lie to me. You made your choice. You chose Brielle over me, over Cole, over your own grandchildren. And now everyone knows what kind of people you are. This will ruin us. The whole town is talking. Your father can't even go to the grocery store without people staring. Good. Maybe now you understand how it felt to sit alone at my family's funeral while you were eating birthday cake." Her mother started crying. "We're sorry. We made a mistake. But this is too much. You've gone too far. I'm just getting started." Marla hung up and blocked the number. Margot Reichert died on December 3rd, 3 months after the social media storm that had destroyed her brother's reputation. The call came from Graham Teller, who explained that Margot had suffered a massive stroke and passed away peacefully at the hospital. "She'd been talking about you just last week," Graham said. "She was very impressed with the Foundation's work. You should know that you made some changes to her will recently, and you're mentioned specifically." The funeral was held in Tampa. Gerald and Luann made the trip, looking haggard and older than their years. The viral scandal had taken its toll. Gerald had been quietly asked to resign from the church board, and Luann had stopped attending social events entirely. Marla flew down for the service, wearing the black dress she'd worn to Cole and the children's funeral. She sat in the back, watching her parents grieve for a woman whose money they desperately needed. After the service, Graham approached her. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow," he said. Margot specifically requested that you attend. Why would she want me there? Graham smiled sadly. I think you'll understand when you hear what she decided. The law office was downtown, in a glass tower overlooking Tampa Bay. Gerald and Luann sat stiffly in leather chairs, their hands folded in their laps. They'd barely acknowledged Marla when she arrived, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut at Margot's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Walsh, began reading the will with clinical precision. There were small bequests to various charities, gifts to longtime employees, donations to the hospitals and children's organizations Margot had supported for years. Then came the major distributions. To my brother Gerald Reichert and his wife Luann, I leave the sum of $50,000 annually for 10 years to be distributed monthly and used solely for modest living expenses. This stipend is conditional on their acceptance of the moral failings that led to their estrangement from their deceased daughter's family during a time of unimaginable grief. Gerald jerked upright in his chair. What? Walsh continued reading. Furthermore, I leave to the Devlin Family Memorial Foundation, established by my niece Marla Devlin, the sum of $3,300,000, along with all properties currently held in the Reichert Family Trust, including but not limited to the primary residence located at 428 Maple Street, Duluth, Minnesota. The room fell silent except for the sound of Luann's sharp intake of breath. I don't understand, Gerald said. That house, we live in that house. Walsh looked up from the will. According to these documents, your sister purchased the property in 2018 and allowed you to live there rent-free. As of today, ownership transfers to the foundation. Marla felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Genuine surprise. She'd known Margot was wealthy, had hoped for a significant donation to the foundation. But this was beyond anything she'd imagined. There's more, Walsh said, returning to the document. Mrs. Reichert left a personal letter to be read aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries. She opened a sealed envelope and began to read in Margot's voice. To my family, I have spent my life building wealth not for my own comfort, but to leave a meaningful legacy. I had hoped that legacy would include supporting family members who shared my values of compassion, integrity, and service to others. The events of this past year have shown me that some members of my family do not possess these qualities. The choice to prioritize a birthday celebration over attending the funeral of 3 family members reveals a fundamental lack of character that I cannot reward with financial support. Gerald and Luann, you have raised one daughter who understands the value of service and sacrifice, and another who expects the world to cater to her whims. You have consistently chosen to enable the latter while ignoring the former. This pattern ends with my death. Marla, you have turned unspeakable tragedy into meaningful action. Your foundation represents exactly the kind of legacy I want my money to support. Use these resources to help other families who face the kind of loss you have endured and who deserve better support than you received from your own parents. Gerald, the house you live in was purchased with my money when you could no longer afford the mortgage due to your poor financial decisions regarding Brielle's business ventures. I had hoped this assistance would teach you to make better choices about enabling destructive behavior. Instead, you continued to prioritize appearances over substance, parties over genuine human connection. Consider this my final lesson in consequences. The letter was signed and dated just 6 weeks before Margot's death. Gerald's face had gone white. She can't do this. We'll contest it. The will has been reviewed by 3 separate law firms, Walsh said. It's ironclad. The transfers will begin immediately. Marla found her voice. How long do they have to vacate the house? Standard eviction procedures apply. 60 days notice, which I'm authorized to serve today. Outside the law office, Gerald confronted Marla in the parking lot. You did this, he said, his voice shaking with rage. You poisoned her against us. I never said a word about you to Margot, Marla replied. She figured out what kind of people you are all by herself. You destroyed this family. No, I just made sure you remembered the day you destroyed it yourself. She walked away as her parents stood between two cars in the Florida heat, holding eviction papers and facing the collapse of everything they'd counted on point 2 months later. Marla stood on the front porch of 428 Maple Street in Duluth, Minnesota. It was a cold February morning, and snow covered the front yard where she'd played as a child. The house looked smaller than she remembered, ordinary and tired. Sheriff Deputy Mike Larson stood beside her, holding the official eviction notice. He was a big man with kind eyes who looked uncomfortable with his task. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" he asked. "I could just post the notice and leave." "No, I want to deliver it personally." Gerald answered the door wearing pajamas and a bathrobe. His hair was uncombed, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 months. Behind him, Marla could see moving boxes stacked in the hallway. "Hello, Dad." His face hardened when he saw the sheriff's uniform. "I suppose you've come to throw us out personally." "I've come to make sure you understand that this is over. The appeals, the lawyers, the attempts to contest the will. It's finished." Luann appeared behind Gerald, also in pajamas. She looked fragile and defeated, nothing like the confident woman who'd raised 2 daughters and ruled her social circle. 60 days, Deputy Larson said, handing Gerald the papers. "All personal belongings must be removed by the date specified. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned property." "Where are we supposed to go?" Luann asked. "We're 70 years old. We can't just start over." "You have the stipend from Margot's will," Marla said. $50,000 a year is enough to rent an apartment somewhere." "That money has conditions," Gerald said bitterly. "We have to admit we were wrong. We have to sign papers saying we're terrible people. Are you terrible people?" The question hung in the cold air. Gerald's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Because I think terrible people skip their grandchildren's funeral to go to a birthday party," Marla continued. "I think terrible people enable one daughter's self-destructive behavior while ignoring the other daughter's accomplishments. I think terrible people spend 40 years teaching their children that love is conditional on meeting their expectations." "We loved you," Luann whispered. "No, you loved the idea of me. The responsible daughter who didn't need help, who could handle anything, who would always be there to clean up everyone else's messes. You never loved the real me." A car pulled into the driveway behind them. 2 men in work clothes got out and approached the porch. "Mrs. Devlin," one of them said, "we're here to change the locks." Gerald's face turned red. "You're having the locks changed while we're still living here." "The 60 days starts when you receive the eviction notice," Deputy Larson explained. "The property owner has the right to secure the premises immediately. This is our home." "No," Marla said quietly. "It was Margot's home. She let you live here out of kindness, and you repaid that kindness by showing her exactly who you really are." The locksmith began working on the front door. The sound of drilling filled the morning air, drawing curious looks from neighbors who had undoubtedly been following the family drama in the news. "What about Brielle?" Luann asked suddenly. "She's living with us. She has nowhere to go. Brielle is 31 years old. She can figure it out like every other adult in the world. You're destroying 3 lives over 1 phone call." Marla stepped closer to her mother, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. 1 phone call. That's how you think about it. 1 mistake, 1 bad decision, 1 moment of poor judgment. She shook her head. "It wasn't 1 phone call, Mom. It was 40 years of showing me that I didn't matter as much as Brielle. It was 40 years of teaching me that my needs came second, that my feelings didn't count, that my family wasn't worth your time. That's not true. Cole's dead. Avery's dead. Finn's dead. And you chose birthday cake over their graves. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. A news van rounded the corner and parked across the street. A reporter and cameraman got out and began setting up equipment on the sidewalk. "Great," Gerald muttered. "The vultures are here." The reporter, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, approached the group on the porch. "Mr. and Mrs. Reichert? I'm Jessica Park from Channel 9 News. We're following up on the inheritance story. Can you comment on being evicted from your family home?" "No comment," Gerald said, trying to close the door. The locksmith was still working, preventing the door from closing completely. "Mrs. Devlin," the reporter continued, "as the new owner of this property, do you have any message for your parents?" Marla looked directly into the camera. "My husband Cole was a good man who worked hard to provide for his family. My daughter Avery was 8 years old and wanted to be a veterinarian. My son Finn was 5 and still believed in magic. They died because a drunk driver ran a red light, and they deserved to have their family at their funeral." She paused, letting the words sink in. "My parents chose to go to a birthday party instead. They've spent the last year trying to justify that choice, trying to make excuses, trying to blame me for the consequences. But some choices don't deserve forgiveness. Some mistakes are too big to fix." The reporter looked between Marla and her parents, sensing there was more to the story. "What would you say to people who think this punishment is too harsh?" "I'd say that people who've never buried their children don't get to judge how much suffering they deserve." Gerald finally managed to push past the locksmith and slam the door. The sound echoed across the neighborhood like a gunshot. Marla walked down the porch steps, past the news crew, toward her rental car. Behind her, she could hear the locksmith explaining to Deputy Larson that the job was finished, that the house was now secured. As she drove away, she passed Brielle walking up the street with grocery bags in both hands. Her sister looked tired and older, wearing clothes that had clearly been purchased at discount stores. She stared at Marla through the car window with an expression of pure hatred. Marla didn't stop. She drove to the cemetery where her husband and children were buried, 3 hours away in Minneapolis. The graves were covered with snow, but she brushed it off and placed fresh flowers on each headstone. "It's finished," she said aloud. "They'll never be able to forget what they chose. They'll never be able to live it down." The wind picked up, scattering snow across the cemetery. Marla pulled her coat tighter and walked back toward the city skyline, visible in the distance. She had a foundation to run, families to help, a life to rebuild from the ashes of loss and betrayal. Behind her, 3 graves rested quietly under the winter sky. Ahead of her, the future stretched out like an open road, uncertain but entirely her own.